All right, Project A. We're starting into the Toyota 4Runner that you saw in my previous video. It's a 2002 Sport Edition, and it has just about 250,000 miles, actually just over. So it's time to do a lot of preventative maintenance or just maintenance on this vehicle. So there's going to be a slew of projects that we're going to be doing here in the future. But today we are going to be diving into the engine, specifically the valve cover gaskets. So those are known to leak on these 3.4 liter Toyota engines after some time. And it looks like there might have been some work done on it in the past, but today we're definitely going to be diving into it and using some OEM Toyota parts from our friends at Sparks Parts. All of the information for Sparks Parts and the 5% channel discount for any orders from them will be found below. So check it out and let's get right into it. All right, here are the Toyota parts that I am going to be using today. So just going over the parts with the part numbers, just in case you happen to be doing these yourself. So are the camshaft housing plugs I'm going to be replacing. There are a total of 4 of them. There's also a total of 4 of these semicircular plugs. You will see on some Toyota 4Runner forums that they are referred to as half moons, seeing as they are, as the name suggests, semicircular. These are also going into the heads on each side, so there's 2 of these per side and 2 of these per side. And then, of course, the gaskets themselves. And we'll go over all of the procedure for this stuff, and I'm going to try and capture as much as I can for this whole entire project, and then of course some blue painter's tape that's going to be really helpful for covering up where we remove the intake plenum so nothing falls down inside the engine. And also, what's required for these and these is some gasket maker. This is the Toyota gasket maker because I'm going to be using a good bit of this on the rest of the engine throughout other repairs, so I figured why not go ahead and get the OEM stuff. So I have already started to dive into a few different things here, but my best suggestion to anybody that is doing this is start on the passenger side of the vehicle and work your way over. So start disconnecting all the things for the air intake, work your way up and over to the throttle body, and right in front of it, this little induction piece right here, there are a few other like little connections that you will want to just kind of take off. You want to bring out some pliers and some little screwdrivers and all that to kind of start getting working at this. So one of the other things is you will need 2 wrenches most likely for this part of where the throttle cable comes in. It does wrap around, and this little steel end to it does fit right into that right there. So once you do get it disconnected here, you will just want to take this wire, and I'm going to kind of show you how it was set up, but it was in there, and you do just have to wiggle it out, and then it'll be ready to go for you to start taking other things off. There is what appears to be 1 or 2 little coolant pipes. I know it's really difficult to see with the lighting here, but that is underneath at the throttle body here that you will want to disconnect. So there is going to be just a little bit of a wet mess right underneath of the throttle body, but that is okay. It'll all clean up just fine. It's not going to hurt anything by falling there in the middle of the V of the engine. But again, I'm going to start disconnecting some of these other things and do a little progress update here in a short bit. So I have a good side of the passenger side of the intake taken off, and this has revealed a little bit of what we can see of where the valve cover was leaking on this side very clearly, just all the discoloration and what looks to be just a little bit of where it was seeping out in the front here, but we're going to dive into all that soon. Looks like they still have the Toyota coil packs on top, and somebody had numbered them at some point in the service, and then towards the back you can actually see a little bit of discoloration back here too. Hopefully that comes up on camera all right. I'm using the GoPro, so it's a little tough to see on the small screen, but you can clearly see that there's a little bit of wetness back there on these valve covers. So we're going to just dive in a little bit further and start taking apart the rest of it. Alright, some additional progress has been made. So starting over here with the throttle body, where you are going to see some coolant come out specifically is this very front line here at the front of the throttle body facing towards the front of the engine bay, and then a tiny amount will come out of this other rear one. It's an inlet and an outlet. And then coming back over towards the driver's side of the vehicle, something that is notorious for these Toyota V6s is going to be this. Basically, it's a lift point that you're seeing right here. Now, what you do have to do to actually get the intake plenum off, because it is attached to the lower portion of the engine, is through right here. This is a 12mm bolt head, so the only way you're going to fit in there is usually with a shorty of some sort, and then just got a crank on it, because this one was actually torqued down quite hard. I almost had to break out the cheater bar, but we are moving quite along here. These are 12mm bolts here. You do have to split the plenum to get everything off, because in order to get to the lower plenum and some of the other bolts in the back, you do have to take off the top half, and of course that involves getting the throttle body disconnected and all of that there as well to get this whole thing lifted off of the engine, because you do actually, to access the driver's side valve cover, have to remove the whole plenum, which might be self-explanatory, but I did want to go over that real quick for you all. One bolt that I missed, and I want you all to check this out. So the majority of these bolts are very easy to find, for the most part located in deep and around just the outside of where it would mate to the head or the block of the engine, but on the very back, this is the one that I just realized was there. So the very back, right here, mates up to one of these little plastic looms that kind of protects some of the wires around the hot parts of the engine, right here on the very back. So I'm going to loosen that up and then we'll lift this off. I've put down some blue painter's tape right in the center where the air intake meets with the block, just so nothing falls into the engine while I'm doing work, because there is a lot of moving of parts and pieces all around the valve covers as I get them off, and I just don't want a whole bunch of debris to fall down in there. It's a good practice anytime you're diving into an engine in a regard like this. Obviously this is not a full engine teardown, but still a good practice to keep nuts, bolts, and various particles and pieces from falling down inside of it. So the passenger side valve cover is finally off, and after a little bit of a wrestle on it, it seems like this was really giving me a hard time, but you can see that the gasket actually stayed on, so I'm going to have to pull it off manually instead of it coming off with the valve cover, which is right here on this board. But yeah, you can see just came right off and stuck to the rest of the head. just clean right here, but let's get to pulling that off and cleaning it up some, and we'll go through the process of putting in the new half moons and the cam covers. So the other little pieces that I'm doing along with the valve cover gaskets are the little semicircle plugs and the cam plugs. So they are each right here. Right here you do have to take that little cover off. There are two 10mm bolts covering it, and then the same exact thing on the very back of the engine opposite of the front. So we're going to be doing all of these on each side, and let's dive in. I do have one of the little half moons back here removed. I do have where the cam seal plug is removed, and I have this one up here in the front removed. And as you can see, this is the rear cam seal plug, and I can tell you that this is not how it comes from the factory. So it does look like this engine, this vehicle, has had this service done at some point before, but as you can see, appears to be some leakage here, especially on the very bottom. This is exactly how it looked when I pulled it up, so it is very clear to me that there was some oil leaking out the back of the motor, which is consistent with what we were seeing underneath the vehicle itself and causing some of the oil leak. So I'm assuming that we're going to find the same thing on the driver's side. So let's get to the bench so we can clean up some of these parts, reinstall gaskets, and then put this side of the motor back together. Alright, so I do have the valve cover cleaned up around the edges where the inset is for the new gasket. I have put it right into the grooves. It is a perfect fit, and it does hold in there pretty well. You aren't going to have to worry about anything falling out. Additionally, there is no need to put any gasket maker within the little valleys and channels for it all to go together and hold in place. But the one thing that you will be putting this RTV on is going to be, well, I should say two things, one of which being where the cam plug does sit. So this is the brand new one in there. It's all cleaned up in there now, but you are going to be putting it, let me set this down, and I'm going to use the little nozzle for the gasket maker to kind of point where they're going. But the factory service manual does say that you put a little bead right here, then on the opposite side right there, and those are the only places that you need to put it in there. You don't need to put it back in where it sits to keep it in there. The pressure of the two bolts that come through will be enough to hold this in place, plus everything, once it warms up and the gasket maker does cure, then you're all good to go. Secondly is going to be the half moon piece. You are going to do a thick bead right in the middle, and if you do see right here, there is a slight little valley in the middle of this little half moon. That is going to be your guide for where you put the gasket maker. So when you do put it in there, make sure it's a nice thick little bead right there, and then you will just take it and set it right back into place where it was once you have cleaned up the place for it right in the head. So we're going to get all the things put back together, gasket maker on there, and then we will be putting everything on the passenger side back together. Up until just a moment ago, the driver's side valve cover was really stuck on here, and I was having a similar problem with the passenger side when I had first when I first had attempted it. But as you can see, it is now loose. I do have it moving, and I am about to lift it off once I get some of these wire looms and whatnot out of the way. But I wanted to show you a little trick. So if you are doing this repair yourself at home, one of the best things that you can do is invest in a little bit of rope. This is some that I found lying around the garage, and the best thing that I was able to do was there's actually a little tab. I don't know how well you all can see it, but you are able to loop the rope or whatever you find that is just as strong around this little point right here where my finger is touching, and if you just thread it up through this little wire loom right here, and you just pull on it real tight and just slowly pull it away, it does bring this loose. Over time, you know, of course, any sort of gasket does get almost fused to these metal parts in here, so it can be really hard to get it off. So if you do crank on it just a little bit with a little bit of the rope that you might find around your garage, or if you need to invest in it for this project, I highly advise using it because it did a great job, and it's better than trying to wedge something in between and start going like that, because you can score the flat surfaces, especially if you use something a little bit harder. I wouldn't advise that, but maybe like a plastic spudger or something that you might be able to put through there and get it up if that's the way that you choose, but the rope method definitely worked here.